Exodus chapter 8, the escalation of wonders. We are about to witness a truly incredible acceleration in the biblical narrative right here. This is the chapter where divine intervention goes from being a localized phenomenon to something absolutely undeniable. And we get to see Pharaoh's heart face its ultimate test. It's a fascinating sequence of events, so let's jump right into it.
Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today, we explain Exodus chapter 8 in a clear and simple way, step by step.
Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. First, Section 1, Context and the Frogs. Then, Section 2, Gnats, Finger of God. Section 3, Flies and Goshen spared. Moving on to Section 4, Pharaoh negotiates and hardens. Section 5, Key ideas and clarifications. And finally, Section 6, Life lessons and recap.
Okay, let's start with Section 1, Context and the Frogs.
To properly set the stage, we have to remember exactly where we are in the story. We are picking up right after the very first plague. The Israelites are suffering under brutal enslavement, and the mighty Nile River has just been turned to blood. It was a massive blow to Egypt. Now, right at the start of chapter 8, verses 1 through 4, God sends Moses back to Pharaoh with a very clear, uncompromising demand. Let my people go so that they may worship me. Now, you've got to understand, this isn't just a political plea for freedom from physical labor. It's fundamentally about the freedom to serve God. And God gives a very specific warning. He tells Pharaoh that if he refuses, the entire country is going to be plagued with frogs. And the text goes out of its way to emphasize that these frogs will spare absolutely no one. We're talking frogs swarming into the royal palace, into the bedrooms, crawling into the ovens, into the kneading bowls, and literally jumping upon the people themselves. Nowhere will be safe.
So let's walk through exactly how this unfolds in verses 5 through 7. After Moses delivers this vivid warning, Pharaoh unsurprisingly refuses. So the Lord tells Moses to instruct Aaron to stretch out his hand with his staff over the streams, the canals, and the ponds. And the moment Aaron does this, boom, frogs come up and completely cover the land of Egypt. But right here in verse 7, we get a really fascinating detail. Pharaoh's magicians are actually able to duplicate this. Using their secret arts, the Hebrew word there is lahatehem. They also managed to make frogs come up on the land. But think about the irony here for a second. They can use their magic to bring more frogs, effectively adding to the disaster, but they completely lack the power to make the frogs go away. They can't fix the problem, they can only make it worse.
The physical reality of this plague is just completely overwhelming. And in verse 9, Moses does something pretty remarkable to prove that this event is entirely divine. He tells Pharaoh to glory over me, which is essentially Moses saying, look, you pick the exact time for me to pray for these frogs to be removed. You name the hour. Pharaoh says, tomorrow. And Moses agrees. He states that this is happening so Pharaoh will know without a shadow of a doubt that there is no one like the Lord. Now, when the frogs actually die the next day, they don't just magically disappear into thin air. Verses 13 and 14 paint a grim picture. They tell us the dead frogs were gathered and piled up into heaps, and the entire land reeked. Imagine that for a second. The stench of these massive decaying heaps in the Egyptian heat must have been absolute suffocating misery for the entire nation.
Which brings us to Section 2, Gnats, the Finger of God. So, after Pharaoh finally gets relief from the frogs and the stench, what does he do? He stubbornly refuses to let the people go. He goes right back on his word. Because of this, the narrative shifts really rapidly. God immediately tells Moses to have Aaron stretch out his staff and strike the dust of the ground. Notice that there is no warning given to Pharaoh this time at all. It just happens. Aaron strikes the dust, and throughout the entire land of Egypt, the literal dust turns into a massive plague. The Hebrew word used here in the text is kinim, which we often translate as gnats, lice, or some kind of small, incredibly annoying stinging insect. And these things swarm aggressively. They are on both men and animals everywhere, arising from the very dust of the earth beneath their feet. There's literally no escaping it because it's coming from the ground itself.
Now, notice the stark contrast between these two outcomes. Just a moment ago, the Egyptian magicians had some success duplicating the plague of frogs. They flexed their power. But here, in verse 18, when they try to produce kinim from the dust using those same secret arts, they completely fail. Nothing happens. They are entirely powerless to replicate this wonder. It's a huge turning point because the boundaries and limits of their human abilities and dark arts have finally been firmly exposed by the divine. They've hit a brick wall. And the magicians know it. They turn right to Pharaoh and openly admit, this is the finger of God, or in the original Hebrew, Itzba Elohim. This is incredible.
Even Pharaoh's own trusted experts, the guys on his payroll, have to acknowledge an undeniable defeat. They recognize that this isn't just some clever magic trick they can copy. It is an unarguable, direct intervention by a higher divine power. Yet despite his own top experts looking him in the eye and telling him this directly, Pharaoh's heart remains hard. He just absolutely refuses to listen.
Let's move to Section 3, Flies and Goshen Spared. The story continues early the next morning. Moses confronts Pharaoh out by the water with the exact same unwavering demand, "Let my people go." And of course, because Pharaoh refuses again, God sends a dense, terrifying swarm. The Hebrew text uses the word arav, which translates literally to a mixture or swarm. Traditionally, this is understood as incredibly dense swarms of flies, or sometimes even interpreted as a dangerous mixture of wild beasts. Either way, these aren't just a minor nuisance. Verse 24 is very clear. These swarms pour straight into Pharaoh's palace, they fill the houses of his officials, and the entire land of Egypt is literally ruined by them. The devastation is widespread, chaotic, and totally catastrophic. But then, verses 22 and 23 illustrate an absolutely crucial turning point in this chapter. For the very first time in this escalating series of wonders, God explicitly makes a geographical distinction. While Egypt is being completely ruined by the swarms of Ajrav, the region of Goshen, which is exactly where the Israelites live, is spared entirely. God declares, "I will deal differently with the land of Goshen, no swarms of flies will be there." This miraculous pinpoint separation is designed intentionally. It's so Pharaoh will know without a doubt that the Lord is present right there in the midst of the land. God is actively and visibly protecting his people while simultaneously punishing their oppressors just a few miles away.
Section 4. Pharaoh negotiates and hardens.
So the swarms are so devastating that in verse 25, Pharaoh can't take it anymore. He summons Moses and Aaron and finally offers what looks like a compromise. He says, "Go, sacrifice to your God here in the land." Now let's pause here. He's trying a highly manipulative bargaining tactic. He desperately wants the relief from the plague, but he is attempting to keep the Israelites firmly within his borders and entirely under his control. He's pretending to give them what they want, permission to sacrifice, without actually granting them true freedom to leave.
But Moses is completely unfazed. He refuses this fake compromise in verse 26 with flawless logic. He explains to Pharaoh that sacrificing in Egypt would be deeply detestable to the Egyptians. Well, why is that? Because the Israelites would be sacrificing animals, specifically livestock like sheep and cattle, which the ancient Egyptians actually considered sacred and worshipped. If the Israelites were to publicly slaughter these sacred animals right in front of the Egyptians' eyes, it would instantly incite a violent riot. The Egyptians would stone them. Therefore, Moses insists on the original command. They absolutely must take a 3-day journey deep into the desert so they can offer their sacrifices safely and properly. So Pharaoh, backed into a corner, seemingly yields. He says he will let them go into the desert, provided they just don't go too far. And then he literally begs Moses to pray for him to stop the flies. But notice this tragic, incredibly frustrating cycle of events that unfolds in verses 28 through 32. It's a pattern. First, Pharaoh promises freedom. Second, Moses goes out and earnestly prays to the Lord, and the Lord does exactly what Moses asks. Every single fly leaves. Not a single one remains in Egypt. Third, in verse 32, the very second the relief comes, Pharaoh hardens his heart again. And fourth, he deceitfully breaks his promise and does not let the people go. We are right back to square one.
Section 5. Key ideas and clarifications.
Let's unpack some of this. The text repeatedly says Pharaoh hardened his heart. But what does this actually mean in the literal context of chapter 8? The key is found right in verse 15. It says, "But when Pharaoh saw that there was respite, he hardened his heart." Respite means a pause, a moment of relief, a lifting of the immediate suffering. So in this context, hardening your heart means choosing to completely ignore undeniable divine signs and instantly returning to your own stubbornness and deceit the absolute second the pressure of a crisis is lifted. It's a willful choice made in the comfort of relief. We also saw the vital Hebrew phrase, etzba Elohim, the finger of God. This is such a powerful concept. It represents the direct, undeniable power of the divine. It's a power that completely shatters and overpowers human abilities, magic, and secret arts. It establishes an absolute boundary. It is so clear and so overwhelming that even those who are completely opposed to God, like Pharaoh's own trusted magicians, have no choice but to recognize it, admit their total defeat, and speak the truth of what they are witnessing out loud. And that brings us to Section 6, Life Lessons and Recap. So what can we actually take away from this? The crucial points are right here. First, we see the real danger of false negotiations. Pharaoh tries to maintain control by offering a half measure, telling them to just sacrifice in the land. We must learn to recognize in our own lives when compromises are actually traps designed to keep us bound to a bad situation. Second, we see the deep human flaw of reverting to our bad habits. Just like Pharaoh experiencing that respite, it is incredibly common for humans to break their promises the moment the pressure of a crisis lifts. We have to guard against that. And third, the absolute importance of acknowledging undeniable truth when we see it, rather than remaining stubborn, especially when our own eyes and our trusted advisors tell us we are wrong. So I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought based on the distinct pattern we just observed today. Think about the intense crises you faced in your own life. When the pain finally stops, when that respite comes, and the heavy pressure is lifted, do we keep the promises we made in the dark? Or do we, like Pharaoh, immediately harden our hearts, forget the lessons we learned, and just go right back to our old ways? It's something we all really need to think about.
Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.